It's Friday, October 14th. Another subpoena in the January 6th investigation, this time for former President Trump. We start here. The January 6th committee wants Trump to tell them what he was doing leading up to and during the attack.
He is the one person at the center of the story of what happened on January 6th.
Will the former president comply or defy the subpoena? Inflation is hanging on and dragging household budgets with it.
We're seeing higher prices in just about every category, and it's a real burden.
What the latest figures tell us about the economy, and a case in favor of abortion rights based on religious beliefs.
All of these laws were written from such a narrow Christian viewpoint that it doesn't allow us to practice our faith.
3 Jewish women in Kentucky challenging the state's abortion laws. From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Michelle Franzen. Good morning. I'm in for Brad today, and we've got a packed show for you.
What Donald Trump proceeded to do after the 2020 election is something no president has done before in our country.
The House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack held its latest hearing yesterday.
President Trump knew from unassailable sources that his election fraud claims were false.
He personally reached out to numerous state officials and pressured them to take unlawful steps to alter the election results in those states.
Over the last several months, the committee has laid out what it called a plot to overturn the 2020 election that went all the way to the White House.
We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay?
The committee making a case that former President Donald Trump always planned to declare victory on election night, whether or not he won.
New evidence of a memo they say came from a prominent Trump ally, Tom Fitton.
And the Fitton memo specifically indicates a plan that only the votes counted by the election day deadline, and there is no election day deadline, would matter.
And yesterday, in what was likely the final hearing, the committee making a historic move.
On this vote, there are 9 ayes and 0 noes.
A unanimous vote to conclude this 9th hearing to subpoena Donald J. Trump.
But with control of Congress in the balance this election season, will he ever answer their questions? Let's bring in ABC's political director, Rick Klein, to explain. Rick, committee chair Benny Thompson yesterday said that Trump was, quote, required to answer for his actions surrounding the attack on the Capitol. What led up to this subpoena?
The committee has explored so many different aspects and so many different strands of actions that happened, but it all leads to one direction, and that is former President Donald Trump.
He is the one person at the center of the story of what happened on January 6th. So we want to hear from him.
That's the message that the committee sent in authorizing this subpoena. No one realistically believes that Donald Trump is going to sit for this committee. Congress only has a few months left. Democrats, if they lose control, this committee probably goes away. But the members of the committee felt like this was a last final statement they needed to make to focus national attention where it's been all along and where our politics have been for so long, which is with the actions and in many cases the galling, even indefensible inactions of the former president.
This is a question about accountability to the American people. He must be accountable.
That was the theme of every one of these hearings, and even in this final hearing, where a lot of the information was recapped, you saw it again. This was a man, as a former president, that had thought about and planned and plotted very clearly efforts that would overthrow the election, and that even as the attack was ongoing at the Capitol, seemed content with what was going on. That was the point that the committee was trying to make, and they can do it as dramatically as they can by saying that they want to speak to get on the record, the former president himself.
And the former president has criticized, Rick, this investigation publicly all along, calling it partisan, one-sided with witness testimony, a witch hunt. The committee basically calling his bluff to come answer questions under oath. You mentioned, though, that the former president isn't likely to answer to the subpoena, but can he challenge it? What are his options?
He could challenge it under any number of grounds, and it's hard to imagine that a court process around it would would play out in time for the end of this year, for the end of this Congress, and the president has lots of lawyers working at it. He said publicly on his Truth Social network that he was asking why the committee wouldn't have done this months ago, even last year. He never would have complied with this willingly. Let's be realistic about this. We saw people around him, loyalists, take the fifth.
More than 30 witnesses in our investigation have invoked their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. And several of those did so specifically in response to questions about their dealings with Donald Trump directly.
We saw one of his very close advisors, Steve Bannon, get convicted of a federal crime for refusing to comply with this. No one thinks Trump would have actually sat down with investigators here, no more than he wanted to talk to Robert Mueller back in the day. This was clearly a distraction strategy. But the point that he's making is that this was political. And to an extent, he's right. This has lots of repercussions that are legal. The committee talking about accountability. Ultimately, though, the accountability and the way that these committees work is going to be felt and remembered will have to be political. It will have to be how voters are internalizing this, what kind of legal changes are made, and what kind of reaction voters ultimately have to candidates and even a former president who continue to embrace conspiracy theories and lies around the last election.
And at yesterday's hearing, the January 6th committee focusing on what the committee called a premeditated plot by the former president to falsely claim that the election was stolen so he could stay in office. What were some of the standout moments and the new findings?
To see and hear people close to the president talk publicly, or talk now in recordings that were obtained by the committee in various forms, about exactly what would happen if he were down on election night, that he would just declare victory.
We heard from Steve Bannon, from Roger Stone, who said the former president would declare victory before victory could be declared by either of the two candidates.
The Democrats, more of our people vote early that count. Theirs voted mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm.
And predicting exactly what happened, it tells you about the premeditation that was involved in this.
We also interviewed Brad Parscale, President Trump's former campaign manager. He told us he understood that President Trump planned as early as July that he would say he won the election even if he lost.
Sometimes the premeditation on this took the Trump team in some wild directions, and some of them ended up not being pursued. But the crux of it, that if the former president on election night was down, that he would declare victory and essentially use his platform to undermine faith in the entire system. That began on the evening of election night, and it continued and reached a fever pitch on the morning of January 6th, when people massed at President Trump's request at the ellipse and ultimately marched on the Capitol.
Among the new evidence presented today, the Secret Service had ample warnings about the threat of violence on January 6th, warnings shared with the White House.
According to the source of the tip, the Proud Boys plan to march armed into D.C. They think that they will have a large enough group to march into D.C. armed, the source reported, and will outnumber the police so they can't be stopped.
And to see Nancy Pelosi in footage that was being captured by her own daughter for a future documentary, to see her trying to hold things together.
The concern we have about personal safety is it just transcends everything. But the fact is, on any given day, they're breaking the law in many different ways.
Taking phone calls from Trump administration officials, from area governors, from the mayor of Washington, trying to figure out how to get things back on track.
If he could at least somebody.
Yeah, why don't you get the president to tell them to leave the Capitol, Mr. Attorney General, in your law enforcement responsibility? A public statement, they should all leave.
And to see how truly shocked she and Senator Schumer were by what was happening. It's the kind of thing you never see behind the scenes, and it's a reminder about how tense things were that day and how close we came to total and utter chaos.
The House and the Senate will be able to reconvene in roughly an hour.
Good news.
One of the striking aspects of all of this was to see the then Vice President Mike Pence talking to Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi about how to get that electoral count back, even as people outside the Capitol were shouting and chanting, "Hang Mike Pence."
Yes, that previously unseen video that the committee presented. The midterms, of course, you mentioned looming over this hearing, but on the campaign trail are the candidates and voters talking about January 6th.
Some are, and it's not universal that it's being ducked. We saw a debate just hours after this hearing in the Wisconsin Senate race. Senator Ron Johnson, who had a bit of a cameo in earlier January 6th hearings, his opponent Mandela Barnes is making this a big issue.
It has to be said that he called those folks patriots. He called them tourists, the people who were beating up police officers in the United States Capitol, the people that were there to protect him.
It isn't, though, the top 1, 2, 3, maybe even 10 issues that campaigns are talking about. On the Democratic side, much more prone to be talking about abortion rights, Social Security, around Medicare and Medicaid. But I'll tell you where it does fit, is that this puts Trump front and center once again in this campaign. And remember what the President Biden said a few weeks ago about MAGA Republicans, ultra MAGA Republicans.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
And if Democrats want to make the case as dramatically as they can about the stakes of MAGA Republicans being in power, they got more fodder for that through these committee hearings and through this final committee hearing just less than a month before Election Day.
And Rick, I know you've been working on a project. It's the Hulu docuseries Power Trip, another episode this Sunday. It's about ABC News embed campaign reporters out on the trail during this election cycle. Rick, thanks.
Hey, thank you.
Inflation, it's still holding its grip on the U.S. economy. Costs for all the stuff we need and like are still going up. The latest consumer price index showing prices are slightly down from last month, but not dropping fast enough, even with the back-to-back interest rate hikes by the Federal Reserve.
Today, the FOMC raised its policy interest rate by 0.75 percentage point.
The Fed trying to tamp down inflation and at the same time keep the overall economy from slipping into a recession. ABC's Alexis Christoforous joining us to let us know what these latest numbers tell us about the economy. Alexis, in a word, inflation remains stubborn.
Yeah, that is a great word to describe what we've been seeing now for about a year, this persistently high inflation that despite the fact that the Fed has raised interest rates 5 times this year to make borrowing costs more expensive, drive down demand and drive down prices, we're really not seeing that happen. Prices overall up 8.2% year over year. And when we're talking about consumer prices, these are the prices that we all pay for things like goods and services. And food is a big one, up double digits, up 13% year over year. There are some places that you can cut corners. Food isn't one of them. I mean, you can make different choices when you go to the market for sure. And we're starting to see, sales of store brands pick up a little bit more as people start to get a little more cost conscious.
Every time I go to the grocery store, it hurts. I think that's what people are really freaking out about.
Rent, housing, another big inflationary component, up 6.6% year over year. We're also paying more for our medical costs, new cars. And while we did see gas prices fall last month, that was a bit of a bright spot. Overall, other areas of energy went up. Electricity up 15%, and natural gas, which a lot of people heat their homes with, up more than 30%.
So Americans are already feeling this. The Fed board also watching the consumer price index in addition to some other indicators. What are they looking at? It's slightly going down, as you mentioned, due to the rate hikes, but not far enough. So what does that mean in the months ahead?
It means that we should all brace for more interest rate hikes. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said as much last month. He basically said that they're going to have to keep raising interest rates to make borrowing more expensive until they see real evidence that inflation is coming down.
The pace of those increases will continue to depend on the incoming data and the evolving outlook for the economy.
And when you look at year over year inflation of 8.3% one month and down to 8.2% the next, that's not convincing, for the Federal Reserve to really take their foot off the pedal here and ease those interest rate hikes. They meet again in November and December, and most are expecting a 0.75 percentage point rise in interest rates in November, possibly the same again in December. You know, this trickles down, Michelle, to credit cards, to mortgage rates, which are now sitting near a 20-year high. All different kinds of loans, home equity loans, small business loans. It's just more expensive to borrow money.
Now, retired Americans got some good news. The Social Security Administration saying that their monthly checks next year will be going up. Tell us about that increase and what it could mean for their bottom lines.
Definitely welcome news for millions of Americans who receive Social Security because, you know, high inflation typically impacts older Americans disproportionately with the rest of the population because these are folks that oftentimes are on a fixed income and their medical expenses are usually very burdensome. So what the Biden administration is doing is giving them a raise, an 8.7% raise in Social Security payments. That is the highest cost of living adjustment we've seen since 1981. So this is going to amount to about $140 more a month in those Social Security payments. And while it's not going to solve the problem, it's definitely, hopefully, going to take the sting out of higher prices for millions of older people.
And that is good news. But what do these changes in the payments mean for Social Security as a whole and all the younger workers still paying into it?
Well, you know, for the first time in about a decade, Medicare premiums are not going up next year. So the government is arguing that because those are not going up, they're able to have a little wiggle room and give retirees a bump up in Social Security benefits. It's certainly not good news in the sense that it does deplete the pool of money, and it's something that Congress needs to tackle and really hasn't tackled. And while it's not going to go bankrupt, that's a myth. Social Security won't go bankrupt. There will be less money to spread around, yes, including for those younger folks who today are paying into Social Security for the older Americans.
And that really adds concerns about what Social Security might look like in the long term, along with these economic challenges in the months to come. Alexis, thanks for helping us make sense out of these numbers.
My pleasure.
For nearly 50 years, reproductive rights for women had federal protections under Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court's decision in June to overturn the landmark case sent the decision back to the states, setting off celebrations for anti-abortion rights advocates.
It's a victory for millions of people who have been part of this pro-life movement for decades.
And a firestorm of protests. And laws banning or restricting abortion access.
We wanted the Roe versus Wade reversed and the authority to return to the states. As a matter of principle, that's where it should be.
That sparked a new wave of lawsuits at the state level. Among them, 3 cases filed separately in Florida, Indiana, and Kentucky claim each state's abortion ban laws violate Jewish religious rights under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The case in Kentucky, filed by 3 Jewish women, adds another layer involving in vitro fertilization.
Now my greatest fear is that I become pregnant and I go to a scan and they say, your baby's incompatible with life and we can't help you. Because that's the reality right now in our state.
The Kentucky law states life begins at conception. Judaism does not define life beginning at conception, but at birth. The women say in addition to the ban violating their religious freedom, they worry they could face criminal homicide charges if they dispose of their unused frozen embryos. They also fear in a high-risk childbirth or miscarriage, they may not get emergency medical care if their lives are at risk from a pregnancy complication. One of the 3 plaintiffs in the Kentucky lawsuit, Lisa Sobel, joins us with Aaron Kemper, one of the 2 attorneys representing the 3 women in the Kentucky case. Aaron, this filing is about religious rights and how the Kentucky law, which says life starts at the moment of fertilization, how does this differ from Jewish religious beliefs?
So Kentucky's laws violate Jewish law and must be struck down. We are really getting at the essence of, when life begins. And this is a health issue for our clients. You're gonna hear from Lisa about how she wants to have more kids, but she's scared to have more kids because of these laws. Her doctor told her that a bunch of her fertilized eggs are not compatible with life. Well, Kentucky says those eggs are human beings.
Lisa, this brings us to you, and we should mention that in vitro fertilization is your only option in starting a family, right?
Yes, both my husband and I have medical issues that make it impossible for us to get pregnant naturally, even though we tried for 3.5 years before we found out that that was not going to be a possibility for us. And so we only have IVF. We can't do IUI. We can't do anything else. This is for biological parenthood. IVF is it for us.
Since the Kentucky law went into effect, where are you now with your family when it comes to planning?
Well, so I don't have any embryos that I can use right now, and I don't have any eggs that aren't fertilized. I have to start completely from scratch because the 4 embryos that I do have are not viable. And my doctor will not transfer them because they're not viable. That would be wasting money and bringing great heartbreak to me to have to transfer, see if I get pregnant, won't get pregnant, start all over again, and it wastes time. So I have to start all over again, and at this point, I'm just not willing to take any of those chances with whether or not I might be stuck holding on to these embryos for the rest of my natural life and having to plan in my will who will continue paying for them onto eternity. And I don't know if I want to risk my own health having a higher chance of hemorrhaging if I miscarry, if I want to even take that chance. I have a daughter and a husband that I need to be here for.
For someone who relies on IVF like you are worried about not only your medical health if you were to carry one of these eggs and what your options would be. It's also about the eggs themselves and if you would be criminalized under this Kentucky law.
Right. It is not clear in the law to myself, to my lawyers, or to my doctors if there is the opportunity for somebody to come and prosecute me if I choose not to utilize the fertilized embryos that I have. And then it's the question of, can I afford to indefinitely store these embryos in order to make sure that I don't open myself up to prosecution? You know, it affects me as a mom who wants more children emotionally. You know, I'm not going to be able to give my daughter the sibling that we wanted to give, that we always talked about doing. It's very challenging for us to come to terms with that, and it's not because we've made that decision, but in essence, the state has made the decision for us.
Kentucky voters will also be taking up a issue on the ballot coming up in the November elections about whether or not to just completely make abortion illegal in the state altogether. How will that impact you and your family?
The way that my husband and I have coped with the news that our first round of embryos were not viable was by us understanding that they were a clumping of cells. They weren't a human being. They were not a child. I was not deciding to discard a child. I was deciding to not use a fertilized egg that in the natural ways of getting pregnant, I guess, your body probably would have rejected it anyways. You would have had a heavy period. You would have never known. And so for me, as a religious woman in the Jewish faith, for us, life didn't begin until our daughter was born.
And Lisa, you are embarking on this legal challenge, but it's very, very personal for you. What is at the core for you in your fight?
I'm just like the other 2 moms who feel like we've been robbed of the opportunity to have more children that we would like because we don't know what medical care we can access safely and what wouldn't open us up to future litigation. And at the same time, we're also angry because all of these laws were written from such a narrow Christian viewpoint that it doesn't allow us to practice our faith and our understanding of being able to grow our family. We can't decide not to use an embryo because it's considered a human right now by the state of Kentucky. It's, you know, they are fighting to have it have the same status as any citizen. Well, that goes against what our religious faith says. It says that it's not a human being yet. And if we have to make a determination from our doctor's understanding of our health being at risk, the bar that we have to cross in order to make that happen is we have to be on death's door for a doctor and an attorney at the hospital to make that decision about whether or not we can have that medical care that we might need, versus what, you know, just a few months ago is that we had that freedom to talk with our rabbi, understand what we could do from a faith perspective, talk with our doctor, and get the care that we've decided is best for us.
Well, I want to thank you both, Lisa and Aaron, for joining us. This is a case that will be followed legally and will be followed by many women who are maybe experiencing the same thing that you're going through in that legal limbo, that gray area when it comes to their family. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And one last thing, pickleball. It's not a new sport. It was created as a children's sport back in the 1960s. But this mix of tennis, badminton, and ping pong pastime is getting a fresh look.
I do see the sport growing because of how much quicker the learning curve is to play.
And recently, some major backing from unlikely pro athletes, including football legend Tom Brady and tennis great Kim Clijsters.
Tom and I are very competitive, and we both come from professional sports. He's still in it, and so we have that competitive spirit.
I'm coming to dominate the sport, all right? Pickleball, let's go.
They're now heading up a new ownership group that will buy an expansion team in Major League Pickleball, and that team will be 50% female-owned. LeBron James and Drew Brees also have invested in pro pickleball teams. Even billionaire Bill Gates is obsessed.
My family played a lot of pickleball. So when people beat us, we're like, what?
The craze has also captured nearly every corner of the country. The Sports and Fitness Industry Association calls it the fastest growing sport in America, getting a big bump during the pandemic.
Pickleball is a really social sport. Unlike tennis, you're really close to your opponents and your partner, which allows for more of a social environment on and off the court.
There are now nearly 5 million players nationwide, up some 40% in just 2 years, which means it might be a great time to pick up a new sport, since pickleball is likely here to stay. And that's where we leave it on this Friday. Start Here is produced by Kelly Therese, Jen Newman, Brenda Salinas Baker, Madeline Wood, Vika Aronson, Iru Ekpunobi, Cameron Shertavian, and Tara Gimbel. Ariel Chester is our social media producer. Josh Cohan is director of podcast programming. Brad Milkey is our managing editor. Liz Alessi is the head of ABC Audio. Thanks to Lakia Brown, John Newman, and our intern, Nania McLean. Special thanks this week to Chris Berry, Aaron Ferrer, Layli Ipsa, Arena Aronson, and Jonah Haskell. I'm Michelle Franzen. I'll see you next week.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Can I hug you?
Yes.
So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
Bring them on.
If only there was a place in the morning to start my day. With a smile, somewhere to help me get in the know. A place as spectacular as, well, me.
I think we might know a place, right, guys?
Bring your friends. Oh, wait, there is.
Good morning, America.
GMA, 7A, every day. Boom, boom, boom. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Robin. Good morning, America. How are you?
Boom. Now that's how you start your day, people.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers
in Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7 straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
This is GMA3, what you need to know. GMA3.
A third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon.
Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Right now in America This Morning, a mass shooting in North Carolina. Several people killed when a gunman opens fire on a nature trail. What we're learning about the suspect. Plus, the deadly ambush on police in Connecticut. How officers were allegedly lured to the scene.
Breaking overnight, President